Hello gamers, Powered Heal here, and today we are talking about Padre's trousers. And this is a new item that gets added with Darmal, so it'll be coming tomorrow whenever they release it. I assume it's probably going to be like around 2 p.m. EST or maybe 5 p.m. EST, but yeah, tomorrow this should be in the game, and it's really good, so I decided it needs its own video. This is one item that you should strongly consider getting. And we're going to compare this to some other items just to kind of like show you how good it is and give you a sense. We're even going to go through other classes in this case. I thought this would be a good item to start touching on other classes with, because this channel was never intended to be solely a priest channel. It's just obviously that I'm main priest, I would say, I guess. But I played the other classes well enough to understand them and advise you on them. And this is kind of a good scenario where you can show some of the other items classes and how they compare to this, to show that it's just insane basically across the board. But yeah, so if you've already watched the prior video about Height of the Wild, it had a bit of information about this in it, because we obviously covered this as it drops in Darmal. But I just wanted to give it its own video because it's so out of band. And what do I mean by that? Well, let's get right into it, okay? So this is a priest that we have set up here in the 60 upgrades. And basically we're showing all of the items from phase 1 and phase, like, I guess 2 technically. It's not like 1.5, but the Darmal patch. So no Blackwing Layer stuff is out here yet, but all of this stuff will be available in the PvP system. Actually, these legs will not be available because they're capping PvP at rank 11. So this actually goes beyond that. But everything else will be available. And then we also have the other classes tier sets to compare the legs to those. And I didn't do like general mail or leather or plate, because there's really no plate equivalent, there's really no leather equivalent, and there's no mail equivalent either. There are some things that are like kind of okay that are leather, right? But nothing even comes close to this. Like basically, the tier set items for a respective class will be better than random leather or mail pieces in this slot. Okay, so basically my thought process is like, if the tier set is better, might as well just go over the tier set, right? Because anything else is going to be worse than that. It's not really relevant going over it. So I'll go back into here again, and we'll look at like the original Pre-Bis, right? And this is the original Pre-Bis, so 40 healing, and obviously this just completely blows it out of the water. You have 6 MP5 above it, right? Now you have 18 spirit on the designer's pantaloons, but remember what we talked about back in the priest video, that the mana regen video, right, where even on a priest and a druid, where you're getting more value than normal from your spirit because of talents like meditation, where you gain a percentage of the regeneration from spirit in combat, it's still taking 10 spirit or 10 point some spirit to equal 1 MP5, okay? So we have 18 spirit here. We can round it to 20 and say that that's 2 MP5. We're still missing 4 MP5, and we're gaining 12 intellect. And 13 intellect, sorry, and we're losing, I guess, 8 stamina if we use these, but it's just absolutely insane, right? So crazy improvement there. Let's look at the PvP pants, okay? These are actually not terrible pants, like realistically. They're very similar to the Prophecy tier 1 pants, and they're not really that hard to get in the current PvP system, right? But the problem is they're just strictly worse. 5 less intellect, 20 less healing, same MP5. Okay, now you could argue for the 2 set. Like, oh, I could use the 2 set and I'm getting 20 healing there. But the problem is now that you have to replace another really good item with another mediocre PvP item to get that, right? So we're basically just falling behind and losing in every case there as well. And while these are, I would say, easy to get, it's still going to be some type of time commitment to get them, right? Whereas, like, you're probably going to be in DM West anyway, and you're going to be the only healer in your group, so you're probably going to get Padres when they drop, which means that, if you even spend the time to go into this instance at all, you're most likely going to come out with these after a certain number of runs, right? Now, Mana Storm Leggings, so this is kind of like a unique item. It's hard to compare this, right, because it just has so much MP5. I think this item is a lot better than people give it credit for. And, if you wanted to use this item over Padres, I wouldn't hyper criticize you. But I think that it's better overall to have a bit more of a balanced stat spread as opposed to only having the MP5. And another point that I would give to Padres trousers here is that they're more versatile because of that stat spread. So, for example, like something like Mana Storm Leggings, I feel like they lose a lot of value in like a dungeon situation where, the plus healing can be utilized really well, right? Just by the fact that you can use Renew more, you can use your slower heals a bit more, you don't have to worry about overhealing, right? So, again, this is a good item, in my opinion, but Padres is at least probably like a quiv to it, you know what I mean? When you factor in like the total stat package. So, and this is a raid item, keep in mind, right? Versus a dungeon item that you can just farm infinitely. I think that's pretty much... These are the Exalted Warsong Gulch Legs, which should be in the game, I think, as soon as Warsong comes out, and they're still fairly inferior. It's basically 1 MP5 on the Spirit, same amount of int, less healing, less MP5 overall, just a bit more stamina, obviously. Coming into the tier items... Prophecy Pants are very close here, I will admit. Basically, they have more, you could think of it as mana per 5, because they have 20 spirits, so they basically have 8 MP5, and then they have 20 less healing, right? You also have about 4 stamina increase and a little bit of resistance. If these pants had fire res, I'd be like, unequivocally, these are better. Right now, I think they're both pretty comparable. I wouldn't run and chase after Padres if you have Prophecy Pants, especially if you have them like enchanted already or something. I don't think it's really necessary to get a pair of Padres Pants and then re-enchant them, just because it's kind of a pain, especially if you can't find anyone to sell you the Bloods, because it's just really annoying. So this is one where I think they're roughly equivalent, but again, you're comparing a raid item to an item that can just be farmed infinitely in the world, right? So pretty crazy there. And this is like the most shocking one, I think. Leggings of Transcendence, 46 healing, 7 mana per 5, right? So a little bit more healing, a little bit more mana per 5. Basically same intellect and same spirit. So these are essentially the same as the Prophecy Pants, but just with like 24 more healing or something. 1 more MP5. And it's kind of scary how similar these are, right, to Padres. Like, this is rag loot. And obviously in 2024, rag is not really that big of a deal. But the idea when everything was made, right, is that rag is going to have, like, the premium loot. So these pants were, like, really, really good at the time. Rag is supposed to be a step above all the other bosses in the instance, like a final boss should be. And these pants are basically on par. Now, obviously, that's kind of because this instance came out later, and typically, even though Classic does a good job of preserving item value over the course of tiers, it's always going to lose a little bit of value, and that's intended, right? So in some ways, it's not super shocking, but, just still like a really great item. And I think the thing that makes these so good, right, and it's a really good comparison here to illustrate this, is just the stat spread on these. Now, you could argue, like, do I want to sack more mana per 5 for more healing? Do I want to sack, a little bit of healing for more mana per 5? Do I want 20 int? You could, like, argue about all these things, right, and switch the stats around a little bit if you were making this item to customize it to your preferences. But ultimately, all of these stats are very useful for a healer. And it doesn't have the most useless stat, which is Spirit at this point. And again, Spirit is just generally pretty bad because it doesn't convert well at this point without the tier 2 3-piece bonus for Priest and Druid, right? So it's 10 Spirit to 1 MP5, and that balance is not really taken into account in these early items, which means like you'll find items all the time that have 6 MP5, but you'll never find an item that has 60 Spirit. You know what I mean? It's just not really something that's built into the item budget. So whenever you're getting Spirit, I get the sense that it's like you're getting an item piece of an item budget that is, it's sort of considered to be on par with other stats on the item when it's really not, if that makes sense, right? So the fact that this item has no Spirit and it just has MP5 and healing means that it's like lion. This is like the Lionheart helm of healing, essentially, right? It's that good. Now, obviously, just healing in general, no piece of gear, especially one piece of gear, is going to make or break you on a healer. It's just not the same thing as a DPS, right? So it's not as critical that you have these as on a healer that it is that you have them on Lionheart helm as a warrior, right? But still, the stat efficiency on the item is very comparable, which is why I'm kind of doing the comparison. Now, let's get into some of the other classes just to show you that this kind of still retains its high status, right? So we'll do tier 1 Paladin first. These are actually not bad. But Paladin doesn't really get much out of the Spirit here, right? You don't get anything out of the Strength for healing. And you see that you kind of lose a bit of MP5, right? Because you're kind of using some of these other stats like Strength. And, like if you compare this to the Priest tier 1, right? You basically just lose 3 MP5 straight up. And you're pretty much trading it for Strength and some other miscellaneous stats, maybe a bit more stamina. So these are like fine legs, like they're not terrible. They're especially good in like PvP, obviously, right, because they're plate. But Padre is just gonna slam on these all day in terms of like actual PvE healing stats, right? And unlike most of the other sets, right? The Paladin set here doesn't really have super great stat bonuses for healing. So that means that using something like Lawbringer in any particular slot to gain the stat bonus is not really something you have to factor in, right? So you're pretty much able to just use Padres. Going into Judgment legs, okay, these are kind of very similar to most of the other legs, right, that we're going to see. They are healing MP5, and then just the base stats. Now, in this case, we cleaned up the Spirit a bit, which is good. So kind of similar to Padres in that regard, but we still have 10 strength on the item, which is hurting us. Because again, we're losing 2 MP5 from Padres, and we're losing 20-some healing. We are gaining a bit of intellect, which is nice, but overall, Padres still better for healing than Judgment leg plates. Also, something to note on a Paladin, when you see me doing gearing decisions on a Priest, I typically weigh things much more in favor of like MP5 than some other people might, right? So it's not like I'm the type of person that's going to come and tell you that, Manstorm leggings are the best item in the game forever or something like that. I'm not that into it. But because of the fact that priests actually have like legitimate mana issues in a raid, right? It's not. I don't find it to be not worthwhile to invest in mana regen, right? I think it is worthwhile to be like, oh well, your flash heal is what you're using primarily, and your shield, and these don't have very good coefficients, so maybe we devalue plus healing a bit and we give a bit more value into something like MP5, right? Now, the problem for Paladin is that Paladin, especially with world buffs, gets to a point in this game where it just very easily almost becomes like super mana efficient. You know what I mean? Like you basically, even very early on, you don't have to worry about mana if you have world buffs on a Paladin, just because of the crit and the refunding of the mana. So what I noticed when I was playing Paladin is that I would find myself opting for the higher plus healing options, even though the coefficient on Flash of Light is bad. Okay, so even though it's the same as Flash Heal coefficient, right, I would still opt into getting more plus healing when I could, because, you know, you just don't have to worry about the mana anyway. Like, you're literally just so mana efficient that it's actually hard to go on this class when you're consuming on it. So, in that particular case, getting every little bit of plus healing mattered more to me, right? Because the mana aspect wasn't really a factor. Also, when you're spamming Flash of Light on a Paladin, the base threshold for the heal itself is lower, right? Which means that you have less of a problem dealing with overheal in some cases, right? Because you're not using like a super high healing value heal, which means that even if though you're cutting your plus healing down by quite a bit via the coefficient, it's like, again, like 40 to 44% on Flash of Light, you know, you're still gaining 100% of what you do end up getting from the coefficient, right? Whereas in other classes, like if I'm casting a max rank Flash Heal on a Priest to try and head off some danger that somebody's under in the raid, like a warrior's, you know, maybe about to take some damage, and I feel like I need to cast the max rank Flash, it may overheal them quite significantly in some cases, especially if it crits. And you don't really run into the same issue with Flash of Light because it just does so little healing relative in a normal sense, right? That, yeah, you just don't really have to worry about that as much. So in this case, I would definitely use Padre still over an item like this on Paladin specifically. So that's Paladin, and we'll get into Druid now. So Druid honestly has some crazy gear, I have to admit. Like, some of the Druid set pieces are just really impressive. Unfortunately, the set bonuses on Druid, again, are pretty mid. The 2 set being the 2% crit, which is the same one as Priest, and that being the best one for Druid, though, is kind of unfortunate. So that is not so great, but the actual stats on this item are quite good, and I could see somebody making the argument for like using this over Padres. I wouldn't think they would be crazy or anything like that, because it's basically the same amount of MP5, right? The same amount of intellect, and you're just losing like 20-some healing. Now, I will say that your healing patterns on Druid, especially if you're trying to be efficient, you're using a lot of rank 4 heal, which does have an 85% coefficient, and your HOTS do have really high coefficients, generally speaking, especially rejuvenation. So every point of healing does matter a bit more on Druid. Problem is, if you're using HOTS on Druid, it's obviously very difficult to get the HOTS to hit their full effect, right? But if you're not really playing into HOTS too much, and you're mostly relying on rank 4 heal to kind of like spot heal the raid, cancel cast on the tank, then the extra healing from this, from Padres, is, you know, definitely decent. And I could see somebody using Padres over this. Ultimately, though, I think like these items are pretty interchangeable between this and Padres. You know, if you wanted to use the Cenarian, you would use it, or if you already had it or whatever, right? And if you didn't have it and you want to get Padres to fill in the gap until you got it, that's fine as well. So, yeah, it's kind of like on pace. Again, though, even when we're saying on pace, keep in mind, we're on pace with raid items, right? So we want to put that in perspective. Going to Druid tier 2, this is very similar to Priest tier 2. It's actually better itemized in my opinion. Basically like very close to 8 mana per 5 with even more intellect than the Priest gear, I think, and 48 healing. And obviously this is really key because it has some great set bonuses. All these set bonuses are pretty good on Druid. So this is just a better item than Padre's. There's pretty much no denying that, but it is rag loot and it is raid loot. So keep that in mind, right? And again, like it's kind of like with the Priest, right? Like we're keeping many of the very important core stats here, right? And we're only losing out on the margin. So it's barely better in terms of like actual effectiveness in raid. And it's a dungeon item versus a piece of rag loot. Now, Shaman, in my opinion, is where this item tends to almost benefit most. Crit is a little bit underrated on Shaman because it's super good, especially with like low rank chain heal, in my opinion. But, you know, ultimately getting 1% crit for an item doesn't really feel so good because you have 10% crit from an Ixia buff, right? And then you have 5% crit from Songflowers, so you get 15%. And tomorrow you're going to have 3% from Dire Maul. So you're already getting 20 or 18, 20% crit, right? And well, and you're going to have base crit, okay? And then you're also going to have some crit from your intellect. So you're probably going to be around 20-some% crit just from existing almost in the raid, right? So getting 1% additional crit, not really the end of the world here. And yeah, it's just, in my opinion, way better to have Padres here. The MP5 is just really nice, similar healing value, similar intellect value, and Spirit does even less on Shaman than it does in other classes. So there's that. Then let's go to the Earth Fury pants. Okay. So these are kind of more in line. You actually see MP5 on these with some of the other tier sets. However, the healing drops off a cliff, right? The bonuses here are actually, you know, quite decent in some cases. So depending on what you're doing, you may want to use these Earth for your legs in certain contexts. But again, just on like a one-off item, the Padres pants destroy these, right? Like 30 more healing for the same MP5, same intellect value. And in here, we're not even gaining the Spirit as MP5, right? Because Shaman doesn't have an in-combat mana regeneration mechanism. So ultimately, Padres are just pretty much crushing these. And remember, this is a raid item. It's tier 1, but it's still a raid item. So yeah, overall, these are just absolutely insane pants. You should definitely go out of your way to get them if you don't have like one of the equivalent type pieces that we just talked about. These are fantastic for like a new healer if you bring up a healer alt. Stuff like this is great for split runs where you're not going to have access to raid tier probably on the alt character, right? Because the character is there to essentially feed the mains. So this is a great way to gain extra strength on characters like that. And just an overall fantastic item. Super strong. Really sick item. Probably the best healer item, like pound for pound in the game. And the best itemized item, right? To exist for healer, I would say. In Classic, probably. And yeah, so really good item. Go out and get it if you need it. And yeah, that's pretty much it. We'll be doing another video talking about the trinket for the various classes as well. And that'll probably be our last RML video. So thank you guys for watching. If you found this helpful, like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you guys next time.